This program was made possible through the generosity of the following organizations. Northern Utilities Natural Gas, celebrating 150 years of service to Maine consumers. Hannaford Brothers, serving Maine at 46 Shop and Save supermarket locations. Hanover Insurance Company, helping protect the financial interests of Maine citizens by providing a wide range of insurance products in Maine for over 150 years. International Paper Maine, caring about the state we're in. New England Cable Television Association, Maine cable operators, proud to be a part of this project. Verrill and Dana, a full-service law firm with offices in Augusta, Portland, and Kennebunk, Maine, and Washington, D.C., proud to sponsor this educational video program.
I am 22 years old. I'm the youngest representative ever to serve.
And that's what I like about it. It gives you a good feeling if you can do something for your constituents.
It's very much of an honor and a huge responsibility.
We're technically part-time position. I work as a banker for Key Bank in my other life.
Everybody from a school's teacher to a student can actually have a big influence in government.
Maine is a really cool state. It's got forests and lakes and mountains and beaches and even lots of farms. So people in Maine are pretty independent because they can still work in traditional ways like farming or fishing or logging. But also in Maine today, there's lots that's modern, like high-tech industries and good social services. We've got it all, but luckily not too much, like crowding or crime or urban blight. Life is really good in Maine.
We the people hand in hand. We the people understand.
The job of maintaining Maine's quality of life is in the hands of our lawmakers, our elected legislators, who come from all areas of Maine to represent their friends and neighbors in the state legislature in Augusta.
I live on the island of North Haven, which is a community of about 350 people in Penobscot Bay. We're 12 miles offshore, and I actually take a ferry to get to the mainland before I drive 45 minutes to get to Augusta. I spend many nights during the legislative session up here in Augusta, so I have kind of a second home. But I do have teenagers still at home, so I make my best effort to get home as many nights as I can and to continue to be part of my community. It is my base. It's where I go to the local coffee shop to find out what people are thinking about outside of the State House some days, and it's my home.
From a beautiful place called Presque Isle. It's rolling hills with farms. We have a very busy, bustling downtown and a quarter-mile long mall, so we have a really good mix of what you'd have in the city and you'd have in the country. If somebody's broken down the side of the road, you never drive by them. You just pull over and you see if you can help.
My constituency it's a small town. We don't have much industry in my 5 towns. They're the type of person that appreciates what you do for them.
When I was campaigning and I'd go door to door and talk to people, I had several people who told me to wait just a minute and would go and try to get their money for the paper boy, and then I'd have to explain that, no, indeed, I'm not your paper boy. I'm here running for office. I represent a section of Bangor. It's a pretty diverse section of Bangor. We have the largest section of public housing within my district, this side of Boston, over 600 units, as well as a middle-class residential section. I also have a major airport, a university, and a large industrial park within the district. So you have a very broad range of people with a broad range of incomes, a large retirement community. So really it touches on every spectrum that I can think of.
Well, it's a very friendly area. I receive constant compliments from people who come to visit. It's predominantly Catholic, French, Acadian heritage. My district have a mill, Fraser Paper, and I work part-time at the mill when I can. They offer opportunities for people who are still in college to earn some extra money for tuition costs and so forth.
It's the first time the MEA will be built on the learning zones.
Protecting and preserving Maine is in the hands of this diverse group of people. During their 2-year terms, their primary duty is to be in Augusta full-time during the legislative session, which starts each year in January and ends in the spring or early summer.
But legislators are never really off duty. They learn what their constituents want and need when they're on home territory.
Well, because I live in a very small town, people approach me informally, virtually anywhere they see me, anytime they want.
My wife says when we're in a rush and we go to the grocery store, I have to wait in the car. But you feel like a celebrity some days.
It follows you everywhere. You stop in grocery stores, on the street, and you're walking any which way, people recognize you, will ask you questions, and certainly that's part of the whole system itself.
Then I'll get a phone call. I can't get the Bureau of Taxation. I want to know what's happening with my tax refund. Or I need to find out about my income tax. Or, and they don't know, they can't get through the system. So they call me, and that's what I like doing.
The state legislature, state government overall is so much closer to the people than the federal Congress is. And consequently, I think it's also a simpler process. We're citizens who really live and work in the communities we represent.
During the legislative session, lawmakers, lobbyists, and citizens from all areas of Maine go to Augusta to get things moving, get bills passed removing outdated laws from the books, or put new laws in place which govern our schools and work, our environment, even our relationship to one another.
This activity, the process of legislation, is like a great web or safety net that both connects and protects us.
And carries us forward into the future.
Welcome to Legislating Maine, a person-to-person interactive site. Here you will discover the basic principles governing the legislative process in Maine.
As in the rest of the U.S., in Maine there are 3 branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial.
The press, radio, television, and newspapers are sometimes referred to as the 4th branch of government because of the strong influence the media has on public opinion. Most of the news that people get about what happens in Augusta comes from the media, radio and TV, newspapers and magazines. But the press can't possibly report on all that goes on in the Capitol. That's why it's so important for each citizen to find out and understand what goes on in the legislature and throughout the state in the process of lawmaking.
I think the role of a legislator really has 2 parts. One is to represent the district that sent them to Augusta to work, and the second is to develop good statewide public policy.
Basically what we do is we do the laws of the state. Everything from speed limits to what's a prescription drug and what's not a prescription drug, to what kind of R factor you should have in your roof.
We are a fairly, well, in the House side, fairly large legislature, 151 members, and I think that provides a great opportunity to involve the whole state, all the rural communities. There's been efforts to reduce the size of the legislature, but I think those would hurt Maine because it's a form of what's traditionally a unique New England tradition of large legislatures.
We also have a petition state, so if the citizens and the public don't like or don't feel that the legislature is representing them best, they can go out and get some signatures and put a question on the ballot and end run or go around the legislature, and very few states allow that.
It's a part-time enterprise. The expectation is that we represent our citizens because we are citizens. Legislators at the state level make about $9,000 a year. Members of Congress make about $135,000 a year.
So there are several distinctions between the House and the Senate, but in fact we're equal bodies. The House has far more members, 151, and the Senate has 35. So that means each senator has about 5 to 7 House members in their own district. So we have slightly different numbers and a slightly different way of operating. With so many members in the House, they're likely to have longer debate, to look at things in a different way than the Senate, and the Senate meets for shorter periods of time, and generally, because we have less members, has less debate.
Maine's legislature meets each year in January. Legislators are elected for 2 years at a time.
So Maine has a biennial legislature. We actually meet for 2 years at a time, and then both the House and the Senate runs for re-election. During the first session of the legislature, we're here about 6 months. We spend about 6 months working in the Capitol, and that is the year we pass what's called our biennial budget, really our 2-year budget that funds the state for 2 years. In the second session of the legislature, we're meant to come back for about 3 months and only handle emergency legislation and supplemental budget items. That means things that we didn't have enough money for, we ran out of money, or if we have a surplus and we want to direct it to something. So the second year we're here isn't meant to be a major budget year. That we do once every 2 years, and it holds us for 2 years.
Potential laws to be considered by the legislature are legal documents called bills.
A bill is a document that represents an idea about the way a law should be changed, deleted, or added as a new part of Maine statutes. It is first and foremost a concept and generally reflects ideas that legislators get from their districts, get from the people that have sent them to the state capitol.
Providing you have interest in a bill, the reviser's office, you just tell them the title of the bill, what you have in mind, in fact, and they proceed to write up the document in legislative terms, in legal terms. You do not have to have any legal expertise. And that's the beginning of presenting a bill.
When a bill is first drafted, the prime sponsor would be the person who put the idea in. That individual then, if he or she chooses, can then go and talk to other state representatives or state senators and ask them to become a part of the bill on the sponsor list, and their name would actually be affixed onto the actual document, which is our bill. The importance is as follows. You want to have as many people with a diverse background as possible on your bill in order to generate support for the entire legislature. So if I have an issue that I know could be one that is of a partisan nature, in other words, Democrats supporting it, Republicans may not be, I think my goal would be to try to find people from both parties who could be supportive of my idea.
There are slots for up to 8 sponsors on a bill. The reviser's office writes the first draft of each bill in legal language using an established format. The bill is numbered and is referenced as a legal document, LD, by its number.
Once printed, a bill is referred to a legislative committee to receive the in-depth review a potential law deserves. The committee assigned to consider a bill is usually one that seems most appropriate for the bill's subject matter. For example, the Education Committee would study a bill about changes in Maine schools.
Maine is one of just 3 states to have joint standing committees composed of legislators from both the House and the Senate. All legislators serve on at least one committee.
The most important part of the legislative process is committee work, and all of our public hearings are completely and totally open to the public. That's one of the biggest differences with the federal government, because their committees meet, only take testimony from people who are invited. But here, all the committees have public hearings on their bills, which means that any citizen, no matter how old, whether they're an elementary school kid or a working person, a business owner, or a lobbyist, can easily have access to the process, and they can come in and testify on any bill.
I serve on Transportation Committee, which, by the way, is a wonderful committee to serve on because it's not political at all. Sometimes it gets territorial, geographical, you know, the North versus the South, pertaining to highways and so forth, but it isn't a political committee. You don't know who's a Democrat, who's a Republican once you get in the committee room, and therefore it's a good committee to work on. And we have had young people came in to testify on a bill when we were working on the process to designate new plates.
Most bills have a public hearing which allows citizens to inform legislators of their views on a bill.
Public hearings must be advertised and are usually held in the afternoon so that working people and students can testify.
After a public hearing, the committee schedules a work session to discuss the bill in more detail.
A work session is an opportunity for the committee to attempt to absorb all the information that was gathered at the public hearing. That's the time at the work session where that additional information is brought forward. It's also a time for the legislative analysts to help them decipher what the bill means, what the ramifications would be if this bill became a law, and what the ramifications would be if the bill did not become a law. The committee then takes that information and discusses it amongst themselves and ultimately comes out with a determination, which oftentimes is not unanimous, as to what should happen with this bill.
The bill is reviewed by the Office of Fiscal and Program Review, which provides information about what the law may cost and whether the new law will impact existing laws. A committee considers the issues brought up by the bill, including legal and financial considerations. Then, discussion is closed and the committee votes. Only 3 options are allowed.
The committee may vote that the bill ought to pass, ought not to pass, or ought to pass as amended. The result of the vote is called the committee report.
One unique thing about Maine, which actually differs from state to state, is that we have joint committees. House and Senate committees are joined. In many states, there's actually a Senate committee and a House committee, just as there is in the National Congress, separate committees. The benefit for us is that once a bill comes out of committee, there's already some agreement between the 2 branches and a greater likelihood that there will be a positive or negative vote in both bodies.
During legislative sessions, citizens can attempt to influence legislators by contacting them to present their points of view. This is called lobbying.
The most effective lobbyist that I have met is my constituent who wants to pick up the phone and call me, or call me and ask to have breakfast with me.
The role of the lobbyist is to educate the legislator on the particular topic that they're considering.
The lobby is actually anyone who is working in the hallways of the State House to talk with legislators about pending legislation, to persuade them to vote according to their wishes.
The presence of lobbyists in Augusta, while certainly confusing to the general public, usually serves to provide lawmakers with peace of mind that they have heard from individuals or businesses who are going to be impacted by the proposed or pending legislation, and that they've had the benefit of hearing all sides of every argument before they make decisions that are extremely important decisions.
The process of committee hearings, work sessions, and voting is predictable and orderly.
Once a bill is reported out of committee, it is then considered by the full House and Senate.
The first thing we do is to have the bill's first reading. And that's the time where you either accept or reject the bill as it is. That's all the choice that you have. If a bill makes it past its first reading, it then has what's called a second reading. And that's when legislators have the opportunity to introduce amendments to a piece of legislation. So you may not be comfortable with the way the bill looks like at its first reading, but you may go ahead and vote for it anyway, knowing that you can propose an amendment to fashion it in a way that you think makes it better or represents your constituents more accurately.
Once amendments are added to a bill, the bill is engrossed. That is, printed in its final form with all its amendments before going through a final voting process.
A divided report will come out of the committee back to the legislative chamber of the sponsor. So if I sponsored the bill and it was a divided report out of the committee, it would go to the Senate. The president of the Senate would bring the bill up to the floor, and the legislature of the Senate would have the choice to accept either the majority committee report or the minority committee report.
Once a bill has been thoroughly debated in both the House and the Senate, a vote is taken on final enactment. This time, all of the members of the House or of the Senate vote to decide whether the bill ought to or ought not to pass, or ought to pass but with changes or amendments.
Generally, a bill is passed by the majority vote, but emergency legislation requires a 2/3 vote to become law.
In order for the bill to become law, both the House and the Senate must agree and then send the bill on to the governor for his signature.
Carefully established, time-honored rules govern the behavior of legislators, the forms of debate, voting, and all other legislative processes. Maine uses two sets of rules for keeping debate, voting, and all other legislative processes organized and flowing.
So the tradition of mutual respect and the process of parliamentary procedure keeps debate 99% of the time respectful and positive and forward.
Once a bill has gone through the committee process and is approved by the legislature, if there's a fiscal note on it, which means if it's going to cost any money to the state, it needs to go before the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee is responsible for looking at all the state expenditures, all the money that we will be spending, and they can decide, no, that's not as important as this, and they have a massive job to do.
Many a time when a legislator goes in with a proposed idea, he may have no idea as to what the potential is for the cost to the taxpayers of Maine.
Approved bills dealing with money are held to be considered near the end of the legislative session because bills affecting state finances must be considered based upon the amount of money available.
The Appropriations Committee and the Legislative Council jointly review the bills to decide which bills can be enacted, given the amount of money available in the general fund.
Many people think of the Appropriations Committee as the most powerful committee in the legislature, and it's easy to understand if you think about your home budget. I mean, everything is done through your checkbook, and frankly, this is the committee that has the most say over all the money that's spent. Individual committees, whether it's about marine resources or human services, all make policy decisions and oversee the budgets of their department, but even their work has to go to the Appropriations Committee before it's approved. And every bill that goes through the legislature that has even a dollar of spending attached to it goes to the Appropriations Committee. So it's easy to understand why the 13 people on that committee have a lot of power, a lot of say over all the money that gets spent, and frankly have to work some of the hardest, longest hours of anybody in the legislature. But every bill goes through that committee before a dime can be spent.
I serve in the Appropriations Committee, and the way that the state budget is put together involves all of the policy committees of the legislature. It involves the Appropriations Committee. It involves the governor's office. It involves all of the departments and agencies of state government, and ultimately involves the House and Senate and the Legislative Council, which is the body of the 10 leaders in the House and Senate.
Because the state's budget is divided into two parts, the general fund and the highway fund, bills affecting state finances are assigned to either the Senate Appropriations General Fund Table or Highway Fund Table to wait for consideration about the financial impact on the state.
It's the governor's responsibility to propose a budget, and it's the legislature's responsibility to dispose of the budget. The governor's budget is given a legislative docket number, just like any piece of legislation that I might introduce, and it's treated as such. Probably 50% of state government spending, which is about $8 billion over a 2-year period of time, most of it, as we all can imagine, comes in the form of taxes. Sales tax, income tax, inheritance tax, meals and lodging tax, excise taxes, insurance company taxes, cigarette taxes, and so forth. The other $4 billion comes from dedicated funds, fees, and revenues. For example, when you buy a hunting license, that's a dedicated revenue that goes to inland fisheries and wildlife.
It's you and I who pay those taxes. So you should have an interest in that budget process.
The Transportation Committee reviews bills affecting road and highway spending, a crucial consideration in the overall state budget.
Our committee, in fact, reviews the highway budget, and then it goes directly to the floor. It does not go to the Appropriations Committee.
A bill which makes it through committees, first and second readings, amendments, and appropriations to enactment is then sent to the governor, who has 10 days to sign it, to veto it, or let it become a law without the governor's endorsement.
The governor can also veto specific items on a bill without vetoing the entire bill. This is called a line item veto. A bill becomes a law 90 days after the governor has signed it, unless it is an emergency and needs to become law immediately after signing.
Once the governor signs the bill will become law, but it does not become law usually on the day he signs it. It becomes law 90 days after the session is closed for the legislature year.
Sometimes the general public will hear about a bill because it's, or a new law because it's written about in the newspaper. Legislation is closely watched by state agencies as well as advocacy groups, so often by the time it becomes a law, all the key players know what's going on. I think it's more difficult for the general public to find out that we've changed a law, and frankly the media plays a big role in that, as well as advocacy organizations.
After a bill becomes law, state agencies, highway patrol, law enforcement, and the courts become responsible for making sure laws are carried out.
We had some painful debates, like on minimum wage. It's great arguments on both sides. You know, we have folks who are barely getting by that could use a pay raise, and we have folks that are barely getting by that have to find a way of paying for that pay raise. And sometimes those two are so polar opposite that it's hard to tell what the exact right thing to do is at the time.
If you can even work with somebody and help rescue them, you're not only rescuing them, you're rescuing all the generations after them.
We're so small that the state is so small and the legislature as a whole that each individual has a real say in the process, and to me that's what the most exciting thing is.
It's a really interesting position. It's thrilling at times, it's depressing at others, but you feel like you're really making a change.
When you're a representative, it's not just how you feel about an issue, but what you believe to be the best decision for the people that you represent.
If you are educated on the issues, if you know what you're doing, you really can affect change, and that's been really empowering, and it's a very exciting thing to know that you can do something for the people of Maine.